Sir, it's 4:30. We can start, sir.
Go ahead.
Warm greetings and good evening from the Chennai Center for China Studies and National Maritime Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's institutional dialogue on the topic Quad and recent developments. In the fourth Quad Summit, Quad member countries agreed to hold the next in-person summit in 2023, which will be hosted by Australia. While the summit was an opportunity for the leaders to exchange views about the developments in the Indo-Pacific region and contemporary global issues of mutual interest, it also witnessed the launch of new initiatives for continuous collaboration in the maritime domain, space, cooperation, climate change, health, and cybersecurity. On May 23rd, 2022, the Joe Biden administration launched its own version of a pivot to Asia through the establishment of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. It is seen as an important byproduct of the fourth Quad Summit. Going beyond the original intent of Quad, it develops the economic angle to the security-related efforts in the Indo-Pacific. With this brief introduction, I now request Commodore R.S. Vasan, Director General C3S, to deliver the opening address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bala. Good evening, Dr. Tomohiko, Your Excellency, Consul General of Japan in Tamil Nadu, all the distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. This is again another wonderful opportunity for us to touch base with Dr. Tomohiko, who has participated in our programs earlier. It's a rare honor for us that he agreed to be here to give us his view of what this new IPEF is all about. We have had internal discussions in the Chennai Center for China Studies, not just on Quad or the IPEF, but also on the changing dynamics of power play in the Indo-Pacific due to various factors that are changing on a day-to-day basis. The IPEF itself, we have many questions. It's not that we have answered all the questions in the IPEF, because on one hand, it appears to be something that is to counter the initiatives of China on the BRI. On another hand, it offers to provide an alternate means of engagement with the countries of ASEAN. The fact that there are 7 of the ASEAN countries in the IPEF itself is a factor that seems to suggest that there are new power dynamics that are at play. How all this will shape out, pan out, is something that is a matter for discussion today. But we know that there is a serious issue at hand in terms of the 3 different economic engagements in this area. I'm referring to, of course, the IPEF, then the RCEP, of which India is not a part of, and we are also not part of the TPP, whereas China is part of the RCEP as well as the TPP. ASEAN members are also having a phenomenal amount of bilateral trade with China, and we are not yet in a position to change the economic relations with the ASEAN countries in that area. The South China Sea itself continues to be an area of great interest to all of us. Even for India, which has something like 50% of its trade passing through the South China Sea, it is of great strategic and economic interest to us. Today's focus, of course, would be more in terms of the economic opportunities that it seems to provide. There's also a heartening news to say that something like $50 billion has been earmarked. Will it make a difference? It's for us who are in the strategic community to look at this and see whether $50 billion is going to make a difference. And if it has to make a difference, what more needs to be done? So, I will not stand between you and the speaker. We have, of course, the Consul General of Japan. I'm very happy to tell you that we had a joint program with the IJCCI and the Consul General of Japan, where we had detailed discussions on the Indo-Pacific. So I must place on record my deep gratitude to the Consul General of Japan here in Chennai for all the support that we have always received for our engagements in the academic field. So with that, I'll hand you over back to Bala for introducing the Consul General, and thereafter he will introduce the chief speaker, who we are very honored to have with us today, and then we'll go through the proceedings. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I request His Excellency Taga Masayuki, Consul General of Japan in Chennai, I request my colleague, Ms. Sapna, to formally introduce His Excellency. Over to you, Sapna.
His
Sapna, you're
Excellency,
muted. Yeah.
His Excellency Taka Masayuki is the Consul General of Japan in Chennai. He served for 3.5 years as a Consul General in Kolkata before his assignments in Chennai. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan in 1983 and has served as the embassy at the embassies of Japan in India, Nepal, Ireland, and Southwest Asia Division in Tokyo. He held the positions of First Secretary, Embassy of Japan in India and Pakistan, and was also the Deputy Director, Head of India Section, Southwest Asia Division, Asian and Oceania Affairs Bureau. He was a counselor at the Embassy of Japan in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, and was the Senior Regional Coordinator, Southwest Asia Division.
Thank you, Sapna. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, Commodore Vassan, and members of Chennai Center for Chinese Studies for asking me to say a few words at this inaugural dialogue. Institutional dialogue on Squad and recent developments, especially presented by Professor Taniguchi on the topic. Today's topic is, of course, very much timely and interesting since the Quad summit meeting was just held a few weeks ago on 24th May. And the joint statement issued on the day, the four leaders, Japan, India, Australia, and United States, reaffirmed their commitment on the common basic values and principles. I quote from the statement, I quote, we strongly support the principles of freedom, rule of law, democratic values, sovereignty and territorial integrity, peaceful settlement of dispute without resorting to threat or use of force, any unilateral attempt to change the status quo, and freedom of navigation and overflight, all of which are essential to the peace, stability, and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region and to the world. We will continue to act decisively together to advance these principles in the region and beyond. We reaffirm our resolve to uphold the international rule-based order where countries are free from all forms of military, economic, and political coercion. Of course, at the same time, as the member introduced, the joint statement also showed us various areas of our practical cooperation, such as COVID-19 and global health security, infrastructure, climate change, cybersecurity, critical and emerging technologies, space, maritime domain awareness, and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and announced the Quad climate change adaptation and mitigation package, Quad cybersecurity partnership, and Quad satellite data portal as such. I don't speak more on the topic since all of us, I myself, are very keen to listen from Professor Taniguchi how he views the development of Quad. However, I'd like to mention one more thing that I would like to recall a talk program by Professor Taniguchi on Indo-Japan relations, present dynamic and future trend that the Chennai Center for China Studies has organized almost 1 year ago. The comprehensive presentation by Professor Taniguchi on the topic was not only very interesting, but very helpful to understand the Japan-India relation in the Indo-Pacific era. So I'm sure this time again, the presentation by Professor Taniguchi will be most interesting, meaningful, and helpful for us to understand the recent developments, situation of Quad in today's international context. So thank you, Professor Taniguchi, in advance for your presentation on the topic today. And thank you, Commodore Bassan, for organizing today's program. And thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you, His Excellency, for setting the stage for this discussion and taking time out to be with us. Now it is my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker for today, Professor Taniguchi Tomohiko. He is a professor at the Keio University Graduate School of System Design and Management, where he teaches on international political economy and Japanese diplomacy. He served as special advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in his cabinet. Professor Taniguchi joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2005 as Deputy Press Secretary and Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy. He worked in Nikkei business for 20 years. He was elected as the President of Foreign Press Association in London, and he was also the first Asian to hold the position. Professor Taniguchi holds an LLB from the University of Tokyo, and his expertise includes international political economy, Japanese diplomacy, foreign policy, and international affairs. It is an honor to have you with us, sir. With this, I would like to conclude and hand over the floor to Professor Taniguchi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you very much for having me once again. And my thanks especially go to Commodore Bassan and Consul General Taga, who I have to say raised a bar pretty much high, and I have to overcome that hurdle myself. Now, I paid very much keen interest to the recent development of Quad. And I must say, what distinguishes Quad from other minilateral gatherings? There are 2 or 3 distinct characteristics that give a hallmark to Quad. Let me begin by introducing the foundational concept that sustains Quad. That is, Quad is all about seascape. I know, as much as you know, that China and India have had very long-lasting confrontations over the Himalayas. So your defense perspectives are for 2 directions, one to the land-based and another to the sea-based. When it comes to Quad, however, it is not about landscape, but about seascape. Number 2, as such, Quad is based on a rather novel geographic concept of Indo-Pacific. This has been largely a creation of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. First, he addressed the Indian Parliamentary Gathering, Joint House Gathering in 2007 in Delhi, and the title was duly chosen, The Confluence of the 2 Seas. And Shinzo Abe also pushed forward an idea of free and open Indo-Pacific. Because Quad is about seascape, the combined seas of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean must remain peaceful, prosperous, and based on international norms and rules. The third characteristic derives from the previous 2. That is to say, there must be someone or a group of people that take responsibility in safeguarding rules-based international order over the Indo-Pacific. And those countries must automatically be democratic, like-minded maritime nations that are India, Australia, the United States, and Japan. Those are the three characteristics, in my view, that distinguish the Quad from the rest of minilateral gatherings. Why then did Shinzo Abe call on India, Australia, the United States to join forces together to come up with this concept of Indo-Pacific and then the institutional idea of Quad? That is primarily because China's phenomenal military growth is the name of the game, and it will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. If you grow by an annual percentage of 7% in 10 years, you will be twice as large as you are now. And that's how China is accelerating its growth. In 10 years' time, China's Navy, China's Air Force, China's Army, its cyber force will all be doubly stronger than they are. And that much has been well understood increasingly by defense planners in Washington, D.C., circling around Pentagon. And so since Barack Obama, there has been a bipartisan recognition. I am now talking about the shift of gear detectable in the United States. Bipartisan awareness that without relying even more upon like-minded alliance partners such as Japan, Australia, and to a lesser degree, India, the United States could no longer alone help build the norms, rules-based international order. Which is why there's been a really a confluence again of keen interests, especially between the United States and Japan. And Shinzo Abe worked very much hard to bring Australia on the same page and bring India on the same page as well. I must say at this point, had it not been for intellectual courage that your Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has exemplified for many years, we could not have come this far. Why do I say so? Well, it's almost self-evident for the intellectuals in India. Nonetheless, may I say the following. To many in Japan or in the United States, the conventional wisdom still holds that there is a deep-rooted non-alignment bias held among Indian intellectuals. And there has been a hesitancy among Indian elite diplomats to speak on an equal footing basis with Australian diplomats, American, British, and other English-speaking diplomats. It took Narendra Modi's entrepreneurship, intellectual leadership to break the non-alignment mold, to come out and say very much straightforwardly that this fits India's national interest as well. I frankly I'm one of those admirers. I know that there are pros and cons among Indian pundits about Narendra Modi's accomplishments, or for some, the lack thereof. Notwithstanding, I am very much a keen follower of Narendra Modi's steps. I was amazed by Narendra Modi before the Great Assembly of Madison Square Garden, speaking with Indian diasporas. He could do exactly the same in Wembley Stadium. And he is almost like a rock star. Who in the Indian history would have been like that? Narendra Modi is someone that represents the new age of Indian diplomacy, which is why I'd say, had it not been for the intellectual leadership Narendra Modi exemplified, we could not have come this far. Right from the beginning, when Shinzo Abe addressed the Joint House of Indian Parliament in the summer of 2007, there was a keen notion that Shinzo Abe had to pull India into the Indian Ocean Indo-Pacific equation. Well, it's been a mantra for Shinzo Abe to always say that India is the most promising nation in our century, and the India-Japan relationship is the most promising. Indeed, the only limit for the Indian-Japan relationship is the sky. That's what Shinzo Abe always says, and it speaks the truth. It is common knowledge. In about 20, 30 years' time, you will outgrow China, both in terms of population and in terms of economy. And you have been very much consistent in showcasing to the rest of the world, however chaotic it appears on the surface of Indian politics, each and every time you undergo major national elections, you conduct them in the most peaceful, orderly manner. Look at the pundits, look at the chattering class in Delhi. That's probably one of the most noisy group of people. That is unhealthy. That is an indication of healthiness of the Indian democracy. Japan bets very much on India's future. Japan counts very much on India's democratic advancement. Japan counts also very much on the potential of India's growth, which is why there's been a recognition, first, I would say, pushed forward by Shinzo Abe, that now has become a bipartisan agenda to say that in India should lie the future prosperity. Let me just add one point further, one further point again, that is to do with the prospect of African growth, especially the growth on the eastern part of the African continent, where it just happens to be that they have a huge size of Indian diasporas spreading across that part of the African continent. Countries such as Kenya and Mozambique promise to become richer and promise to become high growth economies, if not now, and then in 10 years' time, 15 years' time. So Indian Ocean is going to be the industrial corridor, industrial highway for the rest of the 21st century. And it's everyone's knowledge that when it comes to taking responsibility over safety, peace, prosperity in Indian Ocean and in the Indian Ocean region, that is India, that must always sit behind the driving wheel. And that's another recognition that drove the Quad process to come to where it is now. I am just telling you Japanese perspectives of Quad that may be different from those held by the Indians or by the Australians, but there's been a merge of interests between the United States and Japan when it comes to Quad, because the United States maintains its largest forward deployed military footprint only in Japan. If Japan, let me put it this way, if the United States loses Japan, if the international community loses Japan, it would automatically mean that the United States would also lose its military investment, military footprint. Therefore, there would have to be a much lessened, much limited engagement from the United States in Indo-Pacific affairs. Thinking about it, what is most crucial is not about South China Sea. People often talk about South China Sea for a very good reason, because in the island called Hainan Island, there is a undersea base that stores Chinese nuclear-powered attack submarines. South China Sea must be an area of no entry, because the Chinese military must continue to hide its strategic arsenal, strategic squadron of nuclear-powered attack submarines right in the middle of the South China Sea, which, by the way, is very much a shallow water area. So South China Sea is not unimportant. It is important. It is even more important, ladies and gentlemen, is Taiwan. Why so? Taiwan sits right on the line of the first island chain that China is looking at. If Taiwan has become an integral part of mainland China, the defense line for the combined powers of Japan and the United States must be farther away. And there would be a larger, much larger no entry zone, no approach zone around Taiwan. Japan's strategic space is going to be extremely squeezed. What's bad about it? What's the point? Would that be something that you should take it for granted? No. If you lose your strategic space, you would lose most automatically your mind space, your intellectual space as well. I would imagine provosts of major universities, deans of major university departments would be indirectly chosen by Beijing. Proprietors of major newspapers would be also chosen by Beijing. And major party leaders could say nothing derogatory, nothing critical, nothing realistic about China. I am talking about the future. I am talking in future tense, but you would have been aware already that that's exactly what's going on in Hong Kong. Hong Kong 3 years ago was very much a different place. Hong Kong today is a place like that. There is absolutely no intellectual freedom in Hong Kong. I would not like to live in such circumstances, which is why there's been a much heightened awareness, bipartisan, may I say again, that something has to be done now before it gets too late. And again, ladies and gentlemen, the clock is ticking. Why so? Xi Jinping is going to be re-elected again as the party leader in autumn this year. There will be the 5-year important party meeting this year, as you all know. So Xi Jinping's term is going to be extended by 5 years, the third time in a row, which is unusual. In 2027, he is going to have to choose whether or not he should run for the leadership again, or he would rather step down. And there's a 5-year window between this year and 2027, during which he will have to work very much hard to leave tangible, important accomplishments as part of his legacy that he would like to use, would put his stance on a par with the great leader of Mao Zedong. So, if you try to put yourself into the shoes of Xi Jinping, you could easily understand how Taiwan is very much important as a trophy project. Without bringing back Taiwan, no Chinese dream would be complete. So Xi Jinping is going to concentrate the power available to him, whatever power available to him, on bringing back Taiwan. We are talking about imminent, present danger that increasingly Japan and the United States are thinking very much hard about. That all said, it is only foolhardy to openly say that Quad is about China. Quad is a gathering that together we should stand firm against China. Few people should say anything like that. We just continue to meet. We just continue to focus our attentions on promising projects, but thereby doing the most important thing, in my view, is to continue to develop a habit of cooperation, a habit of thinking India first, a habit of thinking Japan first, or a habit of thinking Australia first, habit of thinking America first. So Quad must not be diversified, must not be looked at as something that middle-ranking government officials could pursue. I would say Quad must remain a leadership community gathering for leaders of the 4 nations. The leadership-driven institution, that's Quad. That must be Quad. What else should I say? You've been talking about economic integration. I am very much interested in economic integration. The beauty of the new framework, economic framework, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, some call it IPEF, that Joe Biden has proposed, it is that right from the beginning, India and the United States have become their inaugural founding members of the IPEF. There was a great desire among Japanese officials, among Japanese business leaders, that the RCEP should start by fully embracing India. But due to the India's reluctance, due to the fear, if I may say, held widely by the Indian people, the Indian business people, over probably enhanced exportation that might come from China, India has chosen to opt out of RCEP. But RCEP, remember, is the opposite sign of East Asia Summit, when China surprised all of us in unilaterally declaring that China would forge a free trade agreement with all ASEAN member nations back in the early 2000s. Many jaws dropped. Then it was the time when Singapore and Tokyo chose to work together to expand the horizon, to include more democratic maritime nations of India, Australia, New Zealand. So created was the East Asia Summit. And if you look at the member countries of East Asia Summit, that is exactly the same list of countries of RCEP. So RCEP without India should continue to be a halfway house. So IPEF is a welcome addition, and it's going to give added value to the regional setup, regional arrangements on economy, investment, and data-driven economy. So India has become an inaugural member. That's very much good. Equally, the United States has chosen to become its inaugural member of IPEF, which is great. My final point should cover both IPEF and Quad by saying that these two institutions have one thing in common. That is, it's too early for us to discuss anything tangible as an outcome or as an accomplishment, because, as was pointed out, we're just developing a habit of thinking about each other all the time. We're just developing a habit of mind, habit of cooperation among us. So Quad's excellence lies in its signaling function. Remember, China is a lone wolf. It's an outlier. It's got no friend whatsoever. It's got no partner whatsoever, which is why they're desperate, which is why they're jealous of us, like-minded partners of India, Japan, the grouping of countries such as Quad or AUKUS. And IPEF is the same. It's given the United States a great opportunity to say to the audiences in the Indo-Pacific region, and equally to the audience, skeptical audience in the United States, that no matter what's going on in Ukraine, in Europe, no matter how serious other problems are, the future challenges, the future opportunities should continue to lie right here in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific region. To say exactly that has been so far the most important driver for Joe Biden to propose this idea of IPEF. So be it, which is my final point. That's fine, so long as both IPEF and the Quad can send out unequivocally very, very strong messages and signaling effects to the rest of the world. We could be better off. In the meantime, you will grow. The Indo-Pacific trade relationship will be thickened. And then we're all democratic nations. We value transparency, accountability, which is why when it comes to dealing with such issues as data-driven economy, we are better fit than authoritarian regimes that tended to hide a lot of things. Well, I could go on and on like this, but I would rather discuss matters with the audience. So thank you very much once again for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now we'll go on to the question answer sessions. There are questions in the chat box. I will be reading one by one to the distinguished speaker. The first question is by Commodore Venugopal. Recently, President Biden had reiterated that US would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Japan had also hinted similar stand in various forums. Considering geographic proximity to Taiwan, does that mean diplomatic and logistic support or also boots on ground?
Not boots on ground, but sails on the sea. That's what's going to happen. The distance between the westernmost part of Japan, which is called Yonaguni, the name of island, and Taiwan is only 109 kilometers. The distance is, let's say, 110, 108, 110 kilometers. So it's fairly close. See, for instance, the Chinese are launching airstrike over Taiwan. It must clear the sky. And in order for China to clear the sky to gain ultimate freedom of movement, it should strike radar sites that Japan possesses in the Western Island areas, which, once again, as I said, is apart from Taiwan only by 110 kilometers. The United States and Taiwan have been engaged in a Taiwan Relations Act, a quasi military alliance partnership act. Well, it's been made strategically ambiguous, as you all know, whether or not the United States would really get engaged militarily in Sino-Taiwan confrontations. But most of the experts in the United States have a unified view that in those circumstances, it's going to be inevitable that the United States should get engaged in the Taiwan conflict. And here comes a very much important and difficult challenge of dilemma for Japan. Certainly, the Japanese would automatically launch its logistical support to the United States. And the next moment, I would say, given the proximity, the Japanese armed forces would have to be engaged in fighting against China militarily as well. However, it's going to be likelier that Japan's armed forces would be stuck in pushing back the Chinese assault over its island chain. Would it be possible for Japan to do the two-front sort of things, pushing back the Chinese on the Western island chain, whereas at the same time helping support logistically the United States? So the Japanese must be very much prepared for those dual combined scenarios. But the short answer to the question is certainly it's almost inevitable for Japan to do its utmost to help support the United States. And given the closeness of geographic closeness, the Japanese would have to be militarily engaged themselves in pushing back the Chinese.
Thank you for the answer, sir. The next question is from Colonel Hariharan. Is China shifting the attention of Quad to West Pacific to thin out United States Navy from South China Sea? It appears so if we look at its diplomatic moves in South China countries. Your comments, sir.
I was not with you at the beginning. May I ask you to repeat the question again? Sorry about that.
No, sir. The question is China shifting the attention of Quad to West Pacific to thin out the United States Navy from South China Sea?
South China Sea's importance is something that I touched in my remarks. It's going to be even more important because China is adding one boat after another to its almost impeccable attack submarine fleet. And South China Sea is going to be the favored sea for the Chinese Navy to hide its nuclear-powered military attack submarine. It's very much important for the United States, Japan, Australia, and to a much, much lesser degree, British and French Navy to continue to show the flag in the South China Sea. And it's part of the freedom of free and open Indo-Pacific operation. Even occasionally, it's very much important to claim to the Chinese that these are international waters. It's not part of your backyard. These are international waters. And that message must be sent very much strongly to the Chinese. I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but that's what I should like to say.
So there's one more question from Colonel Hariharan, sir. How is China posturing affected in South China Sea by Ukraine war? Has it made China a little more cautious in commenting on Quad countries' actions, particularly in the Indian Ocean countries?
I think China is using its talented group of intelligence officers, military analysts, college, regional studies professors to gather as much lesson as possible from Ukraine, never to repeat the initial failures of the Russians in Ukraine. It's common knowledge now, isn't it, that Russia failed badly in gaining command over the freedom of movement in the sky. Russia failed in silencing radar sites in Ukraine in the first stage, which is why Russia had to retreat from the Keio area of Ukraine. Most certainly, the assault, if it actually happens, the Chinese should conduct over Taiwan should involve multifaceted hybrid warfare from cyber attack, electromagnetic warfare, cutting undersea computer cables, igniting time bombs of cyber weapons in the financial market of Taiwan, and so on and so forth. The ideal scenario, I think, for the Chinese is to use the military power in the least in the most limited way. I think that fits the old mantra of Chinese military philosophy. You should win the war without fighting the war. And there are tens of different innovative ways for China to pursue that. The Russia's failure in Ukraine have reinforced the urgency for the Chinese to think about multi-domains and think about using much more cutting-edge technologies. That said, it is a matter of time. The third domestically produced aircraft carrier and its squadron should enter into force. And if you get 3 aircraft battle force groups, in order for China to coerce littoral nations in South China Sea, it is going to be more than enough. The Philippines, under the new president, are saying something rather dramatically different from what the country said under the previous president, President Duterte. Vietnam, historically, is very much anti-China, but these are all smaller nations, and they are constantly under tremendous coercion from China, which is why it's very much important for countries such as Australia, Japan, and the United States to continue to give fresh airspace, fresh water to Vietnam, to the Philippines. Otherwise, they would be very much squeezed to the extent that they would choose to succumb or kowtow to the Chinese coercive diplomacy.
The next 2 questions are from Mr. Rajaram Muthukrishnan. First question is, if Taiwan is crucial, would Japan be able to continue to rely on US capabilities, or would it mean that Japan would have to also build up strategic capabilities on its own beyond what is presently envisaged? Is Japan ready for it? And the second question is, does Taiwan and South Korea as Quad plus joining Quad arrangement to defend Taiwan?
Realistically speaking, I think it's going to be the responsibility solely shouldered by the 2 nations of Japan and the United States to help rescue Taiwan under military assault, possible military assault from China. Australia might do something in the South China Sea, but frankly speaking, there is no actually desire or realistic calculation on the part of the Japanese defense planners to foresee that India's navy would be a force that is present in the East China Sea over Taiwan confrontations, which is fine. As I said, Quad is a peacetime arrangement. It is not designed for any warfare. It is a peacetime institution. As such, the primary role, in my view, for Quad is to continue to send very much straightforward signal to the rest of the world that we are here gathering to help support, safeguard the rules-based international order. The Indo-Pacific region is something that China could not do everything alone by itself. We're here to provide the rules-based international order. That's the role that Quad should continue to play in peacetime. Now, about the first question, that's exactly what a lot of people in Japan discuss almost daily. And it's even more so because the nation is undergoing very much a hectic election season yet again. Once every 3 years, 50% of the members of the upper house must face elections. And that election is due in the second part of July. So it's almost 1 month away. A lot of people are going back and forth between Tokyo and their local constituencies to sustain votes and get even more votes. And that's what's going on in Japan. So they are very much sensitive about political agendas. And interestingly, poll after poll show about 60% of the Japanese polled say that Japan must spend more money on defense. Japan must build more robust military. And that's to do with the fact that a lot of people in Japan have been very much aware of the present danger that they see over the horizon and in their neighborhood. Strike capability, which is none, you may be surprised. Long range strike capability has been non-existent in the Japanese portfolio of military equipment. Now it is being developed, which is called standoff missile, one variant of cruise missile. And it's going to be a matter of time for the Japanese Air Defense Force, air fighter aircraft, to get equipped with standoff missiles. Further than that, Shinzo Abe has led the nation to squarely face up to an option of sharing nuclear arsenal with the United States, a la German way. In the Cold War era and up till the present day, countries such as Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Turkey have chosen to host US military weapons, nuclear weapons. And the design is that when it is very much necessary to launch military nuclear strike, it must be done jointly by the United States and the host nation. Obviously, that was an idea stimulated by the notion that the ground power of the Soviets would be unbeatable. Now, sharing nuclear arsenal between the United States and Japan is an idea hotly debated. But frankly speaking, I think it's not going to happen anytime soon. However, it's going to be easier for both the United States and Japan to continue to allow the presence of nuclear submarines of the United States in and around Japanese waters. And when it comes to launching a strike, that must be a joint responsibility between Japan and the United States. That's the arrangement that an increasing number of legislators and opinion formers are now talking about. So it's a season of discussions, hardcore discussions such as that.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Commodore R.S. Vasan. Regrettably, it is the rest of the world that shifted everything from Taiwan to Beijing, including the United Nations Security Council seat that was with Taiwan. The process of putting the clock back is not feasible. The only option for US is to ensure that Xi Jinping does not take over Taiwan. So how do you see the equation having given up so much that belonged to Taiwan before others almost conspired to replace Taiwan with People's Republic of China?
One crucial difference between Ukraine and Taiwan is the following. Ukraine is a full-fledged independent sovereign nation, which Taiwan is not. Neither Japan nor the United States, most of the nations in the world, have not acknowledged Taiwan as a sovereign entity. Although there have been virtual diplomatic relationships, short of that name, but virtual diplomatic relationships that are going on between Taipei and Tokyo, between Taipei and Washington, D.C., but the Japanese and the Americans have not called Taiwan as a sovereign country. So there is going to be much area of selling excuses from Beijing to the rest of the world. We're not attacking any foreign nation. The conduct that we're doing is not against the UN conventions, not against the international law, because it is to bring back our own territory. So it's an internal domestic affair in which no nation is allowed to say anything about. So that is very much different. The group of countries such as those around the Quad should develop, once again, a habit of cooperation as much as possible to effectively replace the Security Council with something new. Security Council is not going to function because its permanent member has breached the international law in such a visible way. And the veto power of China is something that you cannot overcome. So when it comes to the most important strategic risks, Security Council has become meaningless. It's going to be there, and sometimes we have to take advantage of the existing institution of the Security Council. But why not us developing the habit of cooperation to the effect that we could run the world is very much a powerful word, too powerful a word, but may I say straightforwardly, the countries of Quad should be a guiding torch bearer, let me put it that way, for the rest of the world to follow. In that sense, it may be important for Quad to think about something challenging like climate change by using realistic knowledge, by using tools with which we could actually bring one challenge after another into solution. So Quad must be developed in such a way.
There is one more question from Commodore R.S. Vasan. The question is whether it is IPEF or Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. We need a lot of money to provide benign ways of investment and development as opposed to BRI, which is predatory in nature. In this context, could you kindly tell us why Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is moving at a snail's pace?
Let me be straightforward in telling you that Asia Africa growth corridor has grabbed much mind space among the Indian intellectuals, and far less so over here in Japan. There has been a significant lack of there has been a significant gap as regards expectations about Asia Africa growth corridor. You may say that Japan was very much keen on that, which the country was. However, for some reason, I think the idea of Asia Africa corridor, growth corridor, has lost its momentum. I think that's what I should say. When it comes to money, I should like to blame most blatantly the risk-averse nature of Japanese corporates. Herein comes a great difference between the Indians and the Japanese. The Indians are a restless bunch of people, which I liked very much, by the way, but the Japanese are slow. Traditionally slow, but even more so. Why is it? You got an idea? That is that this country has got a huge number of 70 something, 80 something, and 90 something. Many of them are on canes and wheelchairs. Therefore, they don't want to take risks. And poor are the youth of Japan, which is why you have to send a lot of Indian students and young people to the country that is now opening up again to stimulate the contemporary generation of the young people. You may be amazed at the figure that I'm just introducing to you. You get cash and deposits in corporate balance sheet. I am talking about the combined corporate balance sheet. That is to say, the combined balance sheet covers all Japanese industry, with an exception of financial companies. So it includes all sorts of companies like Toyota, Nissan, you name it. The combined balance sheet of Japanese corporates has cash and deposit that is as much as 60% of the nation's GDP. The GDP of Japan is still nominally very much large, but as much as 60% of Japanese GDP is stored as cash and deposits in the Japanese corporate sector. Because it's cash and deposits, it brings about no profit whatsoever, which indicates how risk averse the industrialists of this country have become. Something has to be done to wake up them, to make them more, to make them risk friendlier. Only then you will see more Japanese companies, you will see more Japanese financiers who would take risks willingly to help build infrastructure projects, help push Asia-Africa growth corridor projects. So I'm very much ashamed myself as a Japanese to look at this nature of Japanese industrialists that are very much risk averse.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Commodore Vijesh Kumar Garg. Has Quad been more on a hype and less on delivery?
Well, the answer is obviously yes. But why? What's wrong with that? Well, it's only 2-3 years old, and it's a long-term project. We have to play a long game, do we not? because the Chinese are looking at us. And one thing that they don't have is something called election. There is no election calendar that Xi Jinping must look at. Whereas on our side, we must always look at the next elections looming very much larger in our calendar. So in order to outcompete the Chinese political leadership, we must always be long-termist, and we must continue to discuss, even if we cannot bring about anything tangible in such a short space of time. Be that as it may, what's wrong? We must be very much focused in the long-term future. And again, we must be relaxed. We must be optimistic. Neither Indians, nor the Japanese, nor the Australians have ever wished and will never wish that we would become like the Chinese. No way. But there will be more, if not substantially more, people who would desire for much freedom, more freedom in speech, in religion, and in thought. So long term, we're going to be better off as democratic nations. That's something that we must continue to believe in.
The next question is from Mr. Ryan. There used to be discussions on how Russia still had the potential to join the global effort to contain China. Can the isolation of Russia be reversed, and can we still engage them to contain the Chinese threat?
My answer to that most pertinent question is Russia is going to be a third-class nation, and it's going to suffer from the negativities of this war for a long time to come. For a very much proud nation such as Russia, it is sad for them to accept the fate in which that they will have to kowtow rather to Beijing. But that's, I think, what's going to happen. So the Chinese keep on paying keen attentions to what sort of attitudes Beijing leaders would exhibit towards the Russians. I can assure you that more and more Chinese leaders will look down upon the Russians, and the Russians would become very much furious. But unfortunately, that's going to be a psychological game that's going to be played out after the debacle that we're now witnessing over Ukraine.
The next question is from Sri L.V. Krishnan. What is Japan's assessment on the prospects of a potential Chinese base in Cambodia?
Cambodia and Laos, frankly speaking, cannot escape Chinese influence. It is actually the weakest link of the ASEAN chain. ASEAN wishes to stay up front. Leaders of ASEAN nations wish to continue to sit behind the driving wheel, which is why they continue to hold their mantra of ASEAN centrality very much dear, which many of us, Indians, Japanese, Australians, have to respect. Nonetheless, Cambodia, Laos, are very small, land-based, not maritime, and they have become almost like satellite nations for China.
The next question is from Commodore R.S. Vasan. On the third aircraft carrier and a carrier battle group, it will be a long time before PLA Navy starts using the carrier battle group for global routes. As on day, they have not been ventured into the Indian Ocean region. Now, long in your assessment, would you see a powerful carrier battle group trawling the oceans in hotspots for presence and posturing?
I share your views very much, but at the same time, I must share my amazement with you. The pace and tempo of the growth of capabilities of the Chinese Navy have opened many eyes in Japan, Australia, the United States, and I think in India as well. The third aircraft carrier that they're building is as big as some of the US aircraft carriers, and they're trying to build a catapult launch aircraft rather than ski jump aircraft carrier. And I think it's going to take a lot of time and effort for them to continue to train air crew members and readiness using aircraft carrier battle force groups. But once again, they have competed many analysis. They have proven that they have become much more capable, as opposed to the conventional wisdom held by military experts, so-called military experts in Pentagon and in Japan. So the learning curve for the Chinese Navy is steeper than many thought. And that's a scary sort of thing, but that's the reality.
The last question will be by Apila Santu. What do you think Quad should do, or Japan in particular, for containing China's naval base in Southeast Asia, especially with the recent China naval base in Cambodia?
Well, you cannot stop Chinese from building those bases in places like Cambodia. After all, no nation, including the mightiest, like the United States, has been able to stop the Chinese from militarizing beautiful coral reefs in South China Sea. Many outposts have been built using a lot of concrete by the Chinese military to make those islands and coral reefs effectively solid military bases. So I don't think you can stop Chinese from building those bases. However, once again, we could join forces. India, Japan, Australia, the United States could join forces. You have Andaman, Nicobar Islands. Setting aside the history of those islands, if you look at the map, very few islands would be more strategically located than Andaman and Nicobar. There has been a talk going on for some time, as I understand, between Delhi and Tokyo to jointly develop better naval infrastructure in Andaman Nicobar. We should accelerate that process. Why don't we involve the United States and Australia and so forth? So we could do things like that. And in the meantime, it's very much important for those democratic nations of India, Australia, Japan, and the United States to continue to stand tall and continue to dominate the public discussion space when it comes to rules setting, when it comes to the importance of international norms. So we are the great status quo powers, whereas the Chinese are a lone revisionist. That's the perception that I think we should push in this complex world.
We have come to the end of the question answer session. Thank you very much, sir, for giving very precise answers. Now, I'll hand over the proceedings to my colleague, Mr. Balasubramanian.
Thank you, Sapna. Thank you very much, Professor, for patiently taking all our questions. Before I request Commodore Vijayeshkar, Executive Director C3S, to deliver a concluding address and vote of thanks, I can see Commodore Vasan has raised his hand. Sir, would you like to chip in and say something, sir?
Well, Bala, nothing much except to thank our professor for this wonderful candid discussion. And it's amazing that his views are so candid and consistent. And therefore, we are grateful to Professor for this honor of sparing time for discussions with both the academicians of C3S and the young scholars who are with us today. We'll continue to engage you, Professor. Great having you with us.
Thank you, sir. I request Commodore Vijesh Kumar Garg, Executive Director C3S, to deliver the concluding address and vote of thanks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. We recently had the Quad on 24th May of 22 in Tokyo, and it was imperative after the so many articles, so many talks all around, to see beyond Quad what are the area, the developments around it. And today's session was one of the most learning for many of us of what's happened and what is happening around and how it affects us, what can be done. In the beginning, His Excellency, the Consul General of Japan, very clearly mentioned the gist of the joint statement which came out after the Quad Summit on 24th May, which was in the press, and stressed that it was the reformation of the values, areas of cooperation, and basically looking for the prosperity, rule-based orders, and the freedom of navigation at sea. In such a brilliant, balanced, and the frank, informed views of Dr. Tomohiko, he covered the whole session in such a, I'll say that he's a seascaping, I'll say the oceanscaping way, to give us a very, very wide issues, touch them beautifully, answers our questions. He started with the foundational concept because he has been with Prime Minister Shambayaji in the beginning of 2004 onwards. What was the basically concept of the Quad? Is geographical concept of Indo-Pacific, combining the sea and looking bigger picture. Of course, the aim of peaceful prosperity, rule-based order, and freedom of navigation. That's the basic aim. And very important part he brought was the group of people. That means the maritime democracies came together. That was the basic thrust point of here. He also mentioned in the current scenarios, India's important role in the whole scenario, which is growing day by day. He appreciated our leadership as well as our national interest as a strategic autonomy in any field. And it was seen during the Quad Summit. We may be differing on different views, but when you went to Quad, there was no disharmony. We were united. That's what is required. In his talk, in question answers, he beautifully answered all the scenario building around the Taiwan. What can happen? What can be done? Who will go with whom? What are possibilities as a true strategic scenario building, very nicely put across to all of us. He also mentioned situation of Hong Kong, that there is no intellectual freedom, and which is a concern in today's world. He beautifully touched the subject of IPEF, RCEP, East Asia Summit, and of course the African corridor, and how they are related. And it was answered in question answers also. And he was so frank, accepting it, the Japan, the risk-averse nature. And this is what we look as a professional talk, and I'm so happy it came out so beautifully. Sir, you brought out beautifully the weakness of today's UN Security Council. Yes, it is, but we got to live it and see the best what can be done within the framework of the UNO. So what it brings to us towards the end, this whole Quad around the South China Sea development, the aim of the Quad, and my devil's 8 question got answered. Yes, it is a newborn baby with a lot of good positive hopes. It has to grow. Thank you so much, sir, for such a lovely, and your views are so clear. So a lot of cobwebs of doubts were clear. What remains for me to thank His Excellency, Consul General of Japan, Taga Masayuki, and Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. Am I right, sir? The first and the last name. I'd like to thank all the distinguished members who are present today here, my Director General, who inspires us, and my colleagues, Mr. Bala and Sapna, who organized the whole show for us. Today's talk, after the Quad meeting, has put lots of issues in a right framework to young minds. Our research interns who are working on some topics, I'm sure there are a lot of doubts, a lot of queries will be clear with this. We thank you so much, sir, for joining us despite your busy schedule. On behalf of whole C3S, I'd like to thank you once again. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, sir. Jai
Thank you
Hind.
very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you, His Excellency, for taking time out to be with us.